Well, hello and welcome to Gospel Conversations. Tonight's gospel is It's for August the 31st, and it's a section of Luke's gospel in chapter 14, which deals with Jesus talking about social events, really. And to discuss that tonight, we've got Jerry Morris, who's in Wisconsin. We have Ben Truman, who is in Christchurch, and Christine Nelson, who is in Orewa, north of Auckland. And Jerry, I think you've got some background on this passage to share with us.
Well, there's not a whole lot of background for this passage because it's set aside in a bunch of small vignettes at the table, right in the middle of the long section in Luke that describes Jesus on the road to Jerusalem. And so he's been making his way to Jerusalem, and suddenly there are 4 episodes that all declare themselves as taking place at a dinner. And there's no to me at least, there's no discernible connection between any of those episodes except that they were at the table. But it is clearly an intentional move on Luke's part to say, this is where Jesus sat and taught, and I'm going to give you some of the teachings that took place at the table. Now, the one we have today definitely makes sense as having taken place at the table, but these are informal conversations, not necessarily his teaching to a crowd, and should be listened to in that way, and not looking for necessarily for the eternal meanings, but advice at the table.
Thank you. Well, Christine, you read this passage. Do you see a challenge here?
I tend to find when I'm reading the gospel over and over again that Jesus is about relationships and right relationships. I mean, the central commandments are love God, be in relationship with God, and love your neighbor, be in relationship with whoever your neighbor might be. And I think in this one, the challenge to me is that Jesus is saying everyone is your neighbor. Whether you like them or not, whether you get on with them or not, whether they're the same language, social class, racial, whatever, everyone is your neighbor and you are in relationship with them in terms of the gospel. It'd be quite challenging.
Thank you. Ben, how about you? A challenge here?
Yeah, a few challenges, I think. One of the challenges is always a challenge with the biblical text, is the gulf between the society it's written in and the society that's read in. And in apparently egalitarian New Zealand, we like to think that we are less concerned about status and some of these rituals of encounter that are such a feature of Jewish society and are certainly present in the text. Though having said that, we're recording this shortly after Trump's had a meeting in the Oval Office with European leaders and met with Putin and with Zelensky. And there's a huge conversation around the small status games that are being played there. Who's the red carpet rolled out for? Who gets a seat around the Resolute desk at the Oval Office? What are the subtle bits of storytelling being told and what people are wearing? So it was a challenge to me to see past the egalitarian myth that we tell ourselves and to realize that actually I'm frequently in these wee status games myself. And so what does Jesus have to say to me?
And Jerry, challenges for you here?
Well, the largest challenge for me with this passage has always been how disappointing it is, how trivial and how non-spiritual it is. That Jesus gives advice on, go to the foot of the table, not because you should be humble. At least that's not what he says. He says, because then you'll look really good if you get moved up. It's a good trick. It's a life hack for sitting at the table. And it's kind of like that passage in Proverbs. It says, if your enemy is hungry, feed him because he'll really hate it. It will put burning coals on his head. It'll be so much fun. It feels like a good thing to do, but here's Jesus saying, do it for what seems like the wrong reason. So I actually went back and looked at a commentary on this, and the poor commentator was tying himself into knots over that, saying, no, we mustn't think that Jesus is telling people to be manipulative in this way. It was all really about being humble. That's not what it says. Jesus was giving very practical advice.
Sometimes we forget that Jesus had a sense of humor.
Yes. Well, let's use that as our little segue here, Christine. Where would you see good news in this passage?
Well, sense of humor. I had this sudden picture of all the babies in the neonatal ward. Nobody knows which one is which except by the little plastic armband, and Jesus saying, "You're all those babies. There is no difference in the sight of God between one baby and another. You're all blank canvases, and you're all of equal value. But love you all equally." And that's good news.
Sounds like good news to me. Jerry, good news for you in this passage.
Well, going back to that problem that I had as I was puzzling with it over the past few days, it occurred to me, all of us have mixed motives, even when we do good things. Even if it is standing up to preach and part of us is saying, gee, I hope they really got that one, or I hope I looked good when I did that. We all have mixed motives. And for Jesus to acknowledge that up front, and then perhaps to use it, saying, here's a start. Don't push to get at the head of the table. And maybe you can internalize that, and that can become actual humility eventually. But for the time being, at least don't be jerks.
Thank you. And Ben, good news for you.
Don't be jerks. It sounds like a so what to me. It's the good news, the grace in the text. There are a couple of places. Firstly, I think the text is dripping with it, and that we're the poor, the crippled, the lame, the blind who are invited to the table. What a joy it is to serve a God of humility. But also, I think good news in the opening words, the fact that Jesus is at the table. He's there at the house of a leader of the Pharisees, that group who he's in constant tension with. And it would be so easy to dismiss them out of hand, to have nothing to do with them, to see them as the enemy. And yet here is Jesus at the table with them. I think there's grace in that, just to have a meal with those who we disagree with. It's simple, but it is good news.
So a reading which has got challenge, got good news. But so what? What does it mean for our lives? So what for you, Jerry?
I like what Ben just said. And I certainly agree with what Christina's been saying regarding the equality that Jesus takes as his starting point. As I look at this and the conflict that I puzzled with the surface teaching and the deeper meaning, it struck me that we are only one person, and that our surface life is not separate from our inner life. If you look at someone who was unable to cede the high chair to someone else, you know something about that person's inner life as well. And we may be all thinking of the same person, in fact. So maybe the start I live in America, a land of flaming anger over politics every time you turn around, a land where we cannot seem to find anything in common in our deepening divides. Maybe the first step is good manners, and let it spread from there.
That's lovely. Thank you. Christine, so what?
Yeah, I completely agree with what you're saying, Jerry. I think I went back to the verses just before this reading, is Jesus's great cry of anguish of Jerusalem, how long have I longed to gather you as a hen gathers her chicks? It was a wonderful image. And I wonder if the so what for me is, am I ready to be gathered into that enormous love? Knowing that I'm going to be gathered in with a whole kaleidoscope of other people, some of them I probably don't like. Back to that neonatal ward, we're all beloved, and it's not always comfortable. Am I ready for it?
Thank you. Ben, so what?
So you remind me of that lovely cartoon which has the first 5 minutes of heaven with everyone asking, "What are you doing here?" I think God's grace is always bigger than we imagine. My so what is I need to read the Bible more regularly for good advice. I found myself in precisely this situation a few weeks ago when I was at an Anglican schools conference, and I was talking with the person who we were being called in onto the pipai. I was talking with our speaker and found myself sitting in the front bench with just the speaker, 2 archbishops and a bishop, and I felt entirely in the wrong place. My hope is that the so what is my own, examining my own motivation. So through the process of a prayer of examen, investigating my life and seeing why I did what I did, and inviting God to slowly change some of that motivation, with the hope that one day I can behave like St. Lawrence, who, when he's asked to bring forth the riches of the church, brings forth a collection of the crippled and the lame and the blind. That invitation to slowly be transformed at my innermost level, to see with Jesus' eyes. Yeah.
Well, thank you for taking this seemingly mundane passage and revealing some of its riches. Jerry, Ben, Christine, thank you so much for your gospel conversation.